Okay, I'm going to talk about manipulation. I call it committee karate. And my problem is going to be, I have an organization. I want this, there's a series of diverse preferences. There's conflict. I'm going to try to organize that organization. I'm going to try to manipulate it or create rules to get it to do what I want to do. Right? Now, I can't, as a manager, I can't tell them what to do. Furthermore, I have to do something that to the organization itself seems democratic. And so we're going to look at a set of tools that everyone in this room operates under if you in a department with a department chairman, essentially. All right? The tools this person is going to have is he's got a series of options. He has his own preferences. He has some feeling about the preferences of other people. And if you're a chairman, of course, you do know that because you have to consult to make sure the group can come to a consensus. In that process, you talk to each individual. You come away from that with some feeling about what they like. So in order to make this democratic, he's going to divide the group into subcommittees. This is a big, hard problem, he's going to say. It's too much for any subcommittee to consider by itself. So I'm going to divide two committees. I'm going to divide the options up into things that they will consider. I'm also going to appoint people to the committees. The committees are going to operate democratically under majority rule. Each one will choose an option from their subset. Then we'll bring that back and vote on it as a group. That's the process. Now, in fact, it probably seems very similar. It might sound a little familiar. If you give me that power, I can get this group to do almost anything you want it to do. That is really a set of power. That's a set of tools that's extraordinarily powerful. Now, I'm going to go about this a little backward. I'm an experimentalist. But I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm choosing it as committee karate or posing the problem of trying to manipulate. Why don't I try to do something good rather than just manipulate? That's going to come from social choice theory, which is basically going to tell me that trying to do a good thing is nonsense. It's posing a bad question. So rather than going about it and trying to give the group what they need, and we can talk about that, I'm going to say I don't know how to do that. In fact, I don't even think it's doable. I'm going to use a little different approach. I'm going to try to understand the tools that are out there to get people to do things or cause people to do things. So I'm going to kind of a little backward, but then the next thing I'll do is I'm an experimentalist. You can put it into mathematics. Typically, I won't believe it. I like to see it happen, right? Because when you start seeing it happen, all of a sudden you learn things about rules and people that weren't part of your assumptions. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how we do an experiment because that's what I'm going to do. Ultimately, what I'm going to do is take an experiment with a problem, have people that we're going to induce preferences the way we usually do. I'm going to pose these rules, and I'm going to show you that I can use these rules to manipulate that group. Okay? So let me first start with the social choice part. Now, we've been talking about binary choices, instability, and intransivities. Well, from my point of view, intransivities is not the issue. There's a much deeper issue. From a social choice point of view, we have a choice. It could be solutions of a game, I don't care. There's a set of options and a set of parameters. Right? We see a choice, let's suppose it's X. Okay? It's chosen. Now I'm going to change this to a larger group or a smaller group, call it X prime, and I'm going to observe this choice change, which is fine. But if it's rational, it should satisfy some form of revealed preference. Namely, if I have a set, and I choose from this set here, which contains the thing I chose previously, I should not choose that because I've passed it over. That's the property that social societies violate. It's not just transitivity. Transitivity is a violation of this. But it's this deeper issue that Arrows tells us is there about if you change the size of the set, this thing is going to flop around. It's not going to act as if it has a preference. All right? Let me translate that a little differently. It's not going to act as if it had a social preference. It's not going to act as if there's a will of the people. It's not going to act as if there's a good system to do. Basically, Arrows is going to say is that you give me this problem, I'm going to show you that there's inconsistencies with that class of problems. Okay? And so if we want to talk about that a little bit, sure, we can go back. But these are just mathematical problems that come out of the idea of game theory and axiomatic social choice. So you can like it or not. I like it, so I'm just going to avoid this problem. I'm going to say the only way I can understand about the only way I can understand about how to go about this is to pose a problem and ask, how do the rules affect what's happening? Are there principles? Okay? So now let me just show you a little bit about voting paradoxes. I think you've all seen these. But here's voter's paradox. You've all seen this. The preferences are Mr. 1 likes Y, X, Z, W. Mr. 2 likes X, W, Z, Y, etc. Now let's put W against X. Well, X beats here. Let's put, and X1's here, so X beats W. Then let's put X against Y, a new thing. So we have Y beats X, and Y beats X somewhere else. Y is over X, so we choose Y. Let's put X against Y against Z, so we have Z over Y is 2 out of 3. We end up with Z. The problem here is that everybody prefers W, where we started, to Z, which we ended up. Right? So it's not just the cycle. It means this thing can be malicious, right? So that's the problem that we're going to get into that we need to avoid. But turns out all known, all conceivable processes have this problem. That's the Arrow theorem. Everything you can imagine has something like this. And so we can look at other examples. Here's one, border count. So you vote for so W gets, say, I think 4 here, 1 here, 4, 5, 6, 7, 4 more, etc. If you give them point voting, W gets 18, X gets 19, Y is going to get 20, Z is going to get 13. Okay? Eliminate Z. Now notice that we like Y over X over W. That's our ordering. Z is a loser. Remove Z. Now we like W over X over Y. In other words, removing something that's completely irrelevant, a loser, causes a system to flip, right? So it's just not binary transitivities we're talking about. There's a much deeper issue back in the background here that we have to worry about. And so, and I have there's many of these examples. These are point vote, vote for your high, vote for your best, vote for your highest 2. You name the decision process, I'll create a paradox like this. That's what the theorem says. So that's where we are. Now, so it says that the institutions and the rules are really important. Well, are they when humans involved? Right? This is mathematics. So when we do it with humans involved, then what do we get? Well, let me show you how we do this. All right? So let's suppose, for example, we have a points on the blackboard. Call this X dimension, Y dimension. We've heard a lot about dimensions. As a group, we have to choose a 1 point on the blackboard. And we can actually do this. Now, Max, if you can get the group to go here, and by the way, we'll do this in fact, I'll give you $200. Okay?
Let's do it, people.
These are, by the way, these are on the order of incentives we typically will use. Now, as they go further away from you, Max, you're going to get less. So if they go down to here, you might get, say, 170, etc. So you have an indifference curve that looks like that. If they go further away from you, your indifference curve gets a little smaller and a little smaller. Now notice that as long as there's no side payments and no threats, and the decision is confined to points on the blackboard, I know his preferences, as long as he prefers more money to less, right? So now that's a real key. That means I can take an abstract world, induce preferences for this abstract thing, and as long as he prefers more money to less, I know what those preferences are. But now I can induce a conflict. I can put somebody else here, somebody else here, someone else here, and somebody else here. So I've got a conflict that'll look something like this. I have a person here, a person here, say a person here, a person here, and a person here. I'm going to use majority rule. Now notice that's the second thing. I've got a group, I've got a conflict. I know their preferences. I can induce the rules, right? So let's use majority rule. Let's suppose that this is a status quo. And we'll use a form of Robert's rules. So anyone can propose a motion to move from here to here. The motion will be discussed. If the motion passes, this becomes the new motion on the floor. If it fails, we stay here. So once we have a new motion on the floor, we can have lots of proposals and it'll be moving somewhere. So they can just push this motion around until somebody says, Jesus Christ, let's stop. Call the question and they'll vote on whatever they have. Here's the question for you guys, those of you who've never seen it. Do you think that if I did this with you in this room, or a series of undergraduates that I pulled off the campus, or a series of graduate school students at Caltech, or a series of faculty members at Caltech, do you think, one, it would make a difference who the people were, and two, if not, do you think I could predict exactly the point that they'll choose out of the infinite number? How many do you think I could? Now, it's a rhetorical question. Have you seen this before? It's a rhetorical question. You know what the answer is. Then I'll say the corollary is going to be, okay, what's it going to be? All right? So now notice that if I have a theory, I can definitely reject that theory. And furthermore, if I have multiple theories, I could see what difference I can actually do contests among them. Okay? So now let me show you what the theories would say. One theory is that these three guys right here are going to get together and form a coalition. Suppose they get to the center. Okay, how many of you think that's what would work? Come on, guys. 1, 2. Well, notice that's a little ambiguity. A little ambiguous because I also have these three here that could get together and the center of them is there. And let me make these big guys. Let's see, where are we? I also have these three. I also have these three. Every three has a theory. Okay? Well, that's all right. I don't mind multiple solutions. Let's suppose one of them. Let's suppose that they feel like gravitation. Like Max says, $100, guys, come on. We might say that the social preference is going to be felt through how strongly these people feel about this. For example, I could push this up to say $1,000, which we've done. Would it pull the group towards him? Just by virtue they'd feel his emotion. Right? But if you think that it's like gravitation, they're going to go to the point which maximizes the total payoff, which will be down in here somewhere. Another theory. Notice I'm beginning to feel this. Suppose it depends, as Mike Levine used to tell me, a lawyer, says it depends upon the flow and the minimum of debate. It depends upon the articulation of these guys. So there's a kind of an alpha leader who's going to capture their emotion. He's going to swoop these people up and they're going to choose what he wants. Well, that's good. That says we're going to end up here, or here, or here, or here, or here. We just don't know who it is. All right, see how this game is played now? Now there's another one. There's something called a majority rule equilibrium, the core. If you're a game theorist, you look for the core. Turns out the core is unique. It's here. Okay? It turns out that theory is going to kill all the rest of them. That's going to work. If we do this over and over and over again, you're going to find out the data piled up there. It's true. Now, it's a solution concept. It says to go about it as a game theory in a very abstract way, you'd say, well, is this point here dominate that? Well, notice that this guy prefers this to that. These guys all prefer the other one. So in fact, this guy right here dominates that one. So for every pair, we can go in and look at which dominates the other. It's just a binary mathematical compute. Okay? Now I can look for the option which is undominated. Is there a point so no other point dominates it? That's the core. All right? The message I'm going to tell you is that is one powerful theory. It's going to work. All right? That's the good news. The bad news is it often doesn't exist. All right? So we're going to push that a little bit. Now let me show you how this works. Let's suppose I said this person right here, I'm going to give him a little bit more power. He's the chairman. He's got to organize this committee just a little bit. And he says, look, if there's going to be a proposal, you guys can vote it in, but as a matter of fact, I don't want anything proposed unless I agree with it. Or if you chose something, I have the right to say no. All right? Not, I can't tell you what to do, but I have the right to veto. Okay? As it turns out, if that's the case, the core becomes that line there. It's going to catch the data. If we make this guy the veto player, it's going to here. Now, this core doesn't always exist. As a matter of fact, if I just change it just a little bit, move this guy here out here, say to here, it destroys the core. Now, what happens when the core doesn't exist? That's a little different. But here's what's going to be interesting. If I do this and this is the veto player, that guy's maximum is going to turn out to be the only element in the core. In other words, if we have chaos, this theory is telling us, and there's one guy out there who's a veto player, basically, and that could come very naturally. If you pass it, I just need to approve it. Or you can't vote on it unless I say you can vote on it, like the rules. What that does is going to collapse a chaotic world into a point. That also is a theorem. It also works experimentally. I'm going to use that trick to show you how, in a very complex world where you don't know everything, to manipulate a group. All right? In fact, the lawyers here are probably already intuiting how we're going to do that, if you haven't already done it.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat the move that went from having a core to not having a core that created? What was the one move you made?
I just moved this guy here off. As it turns out, this point, actually, which I developed the mathematics of in my young unruly days, and Linda Cohen actually does has many theorems on this. If I divide these guys up so that I'm in a contract curve like this, and the last guy is there, that's it. These are necessary and sufficient conditions for a core in this world. If I just take this guy and move him over a little bit, it doesn't exist. If I move this, it doesn't exist. If I do that, then I can take any 2 points in this space, go from here by a series of majority rule and back for every 2 passes. In other words, the world is just filled with these cycles. They're everywhere. So there's a whole series of theorems which tell you that this kind of structure will evolve automatically if you don't have something like that. Right? So, but as it turns out, if you're in the manipulation business, there might not be a group preference because it's just messy. I can use that messiness to get the group to do what I want it to do, very easily. Okay? So I'm just going to show you how it does it. And I can see the lawyer saying, yeah, you guys see this all the time. But the more I'm telling you something else. Notice that we're saying that the rules we can impose, now with the experimental methods, we're going to have a whole series of techniques where we can actually look to see if they work. We can change the rules, etc. Okay? And what I'm not going to talk about, we could also put asymmetric information in here where these guys' preferences depend upon some signals that some people know and some people don't. So we can even talk about how information gets into the system and how it equilibrates. So we're quite a ways along that theoretically these days. Okay, so now let's talk about manipulation. I got into the manipulation business with Mike Levine. Mike is a lawyer. I'm not going to talk about what I did with him, but he's a lawyer. I passed it out, yeah. Come on. I have to be able to get up here and get that guy. Okay, let's see if we can keep him. Let's go to the slideshow. These things just hate my fingers. Okay. This is, I mentioned this as a process of design for the real social choices theorists. This is going to be mechanism design. Ordinarily, if you're an economist, you recognize mechanism design as having Nash. I'm going to use mechanism design, but I'm going to use cooperative games. So it's a little different structure of axioms for talking about mechanism design, and I think it's quite successful. Okay, let's see what the problem is. Okay, I've already told you this. Got a manager. He's a planner, administrator. A large group wants to choose among several options. An option includes an act and its consequences. So these are not problems where there's any uncertainty. They're just, you know what your preferences are. Okay, if they have well-formed preferences, the manager can impose a decision process that follows a reasonable democratic preference. In other words, you got to sell a group on it. Yeah, you just can't walk in there and tell them what you're going to do. You got to be subtle. Okay. So you have a reasonable set of democratic principles. What rules will influence the group to choose, and the option preferred by the manager. So the manager has one best thing. So here's the way I'm going to do this. I'm going to have a set of options. I think there's 10 or 11. The manager has a preference. I'm then going, and the people have preferences. I'm then going to impose a set of rules, which, so the people will vote in what the manager wants. Okay, I'm going to do that several times. Then I'll change what the manager wants. I'll let the people keep their preferences. I'll then change the rules, and so that the same group gives the manager what he wants. Then I'll change what the manager wants again. Keep the people's preferences and the options the same, see if I can do it. In other words, I'm just going to rotate through almost all the options, showing you with a fixed set of options and a fixed controversy, I can get this group to do almost anything. That's what I'll show you. And I'll show you how. By the way, these are really fun things to do. It's very fun even to think about, for guys like me at least. So here's the thing. I have a set of options here, and I have a set of people. Okay? What I'm going to do, I'm going to divide the set of people into two groups, red and blue, yellow and blue. I'm then going to take a subset of options and give them to the yellow group. I'm going to take the rest of them and give them to the blue group. The yellow group is going to make a decision from their options. The blue group will make a decision from their options, and then the group will convene as a whole and choose between the two. That's the process. And I've got to tell you, does anybody see anything wrong with that process? You do. Only the social choices there. How many have seen that process work? Is there anybody who has...
How many people have actually used it?
How many have used that process? Yeah, especially. Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever use this, Linda? Okay, so did anybody ever call your hand on it?
Not until after you showed.
Yeah. All right. Of course, we're talking.
Can
Okay, fine. I have a set of options. These are the set of options. Okay, they're going to be finite, of course. And I have a set of people. Each one of these persons people have a preference over all of those. Okay, everybody has opinions about everything. Okay? I know something about those preferences of each individual. I'm going to take these people and I'm going to take a subset of them and put them in something called the yellow committee. I'm going to take the rest of them and put them in something I'll call the blue committee. I'll then assign a jurisdiction to the yellow committee. That's a subset of options.
Subset, that's what I was.
It's a subset.
Not the entire
No, they're not going to overlap. Okay? It's a subset, a partition, and you have to be very careful about that kind of distinction. Okay? Same here. Then they're going to group. They're going to have a preference. They're going to choose. The yellow will, the blue will choose. Then we convene as a group and choose. That's the process. Now, I have to be able to keep these groups separate. I don't want any chatting, right? So turns out Arrow's axioms of independence of relevant alternatives can be used as an axiom which describes that process, as it turns out. So it's going to play a role in this, not in terms of binary choice the way you do it. It's going to play a role in the sense of separating games. So we can have one part of the organization deciding on these, and another part of the organization deciding on these, and try to keep those guys from getting together. Otherwise, you're going to lose control. Okay? So that's the problem. Okay, here are my options. These are people in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I have 10 people. I have, how many options are there? A through N or A through O options. This guy, number 2, likes L best. He likes G second. So the distance from this guy shows you what his preferences are. So you can see that number 2 likes L, then probably G, then maybe 1 or D, then B and J and A, etc. So you can see his ordering. 5, you can see what his ordering. He likes K, etc. So I've embedded them in the space so we can actually see in a geometric way what their preferences are. Okay? And so I'm going to represent that, and they're going to keep those preferences throughout. If I put them all in if I'm going to put them all in put them in a committee as a whole, they're going to choose A. When I have the committee as a whole, A is the core. They're going to go there. Okay? Turns out A beats B. In fact, A beats anything else in a binary contest. In a weak sense, M is better than N, so I'm going to work my way up the social preferences where N is in a sense the very lowest. Namely, everything down here is preferred to N. Okay? So from a group's point of view, that's the worst, that's the best. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to assume the manager wants something really bad from the group's point of view. Can he get the group to choose it? So we'll run the experiment. Let's see if he can get that one. Let's run the experiment. Let's see if he can get that one. Let's run the experiment. While all the time, the group's preferences remain the same. The only thing I'm changing is the organization. Right? Do you see how I'm going about trying to establish this idea and demonstrate the idea? So basically, I'm doing two things. I'm actually testing the idea that there's a core, and we're going to follow that in a little bit, and some other things. Okay, so I'm going to use two ways of doing this. One way, I'm going to be able, given the preferences, I'm going to be able to use one set of principles. That set of principles is going to be, when I divide them into groups, both groups have a core. I just happen to have a neat set of preferences. So every time I wanted to do it, I could find a way to partition things up and the people so that I always have a core that happens to be what I want. Now that's a very, very difficult, that will occur with mathematical probability essentially 0. Right? That's a very unusual circumstance, but that's where we started. So if I have the most favorable idea for idea, can I do that? The next thing I'm going to do, we'll go to a second, and you'll see we can do that pretty easily. It works. The next thing I'll do is say, well, I've got cycles everywhere, right? In my subcommittee, I'm going to have cycles. I'm going to choose somebody like this guy whose preferences are close to mine, right? I'm going to make him the chairman. I'm going to tell the group, you know, this is a hard problem. We're divided up. Your subcommittee has to have some organization. I don't want you to dictate, I don't want him to dictate anything. I want you to he's just going to help your organization. And so anything proposed for decision has to go through him. He has to second everything. He's not going to be able to propose anything, but he's the only guy that can second, all right? What does that do? That gives him veto power, okay? Turns out, if there's cycles out here, that's going to be the only point in the core. So to really do this right, the only thing I'm going to have to do is choose a subgroup that has a conflict, best if they're cycles, okay? Then choose somebody in that group who's my man, give him this power. That group, the only point in the core is they're going to be that guy's optimum, which I know. It's going to emerge out of the subgroup choice because it's the core. It's going to float up, and I'm going to choose these in a way so that these two things are going to be optimal. I know this is coming out of the blue. I know this is coming out. I want to choose that so that the one in a binary contest is going to be the one I want. Just working backwards. You guys with me? Okay. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. And I'm just going to go do this over and over and over again. So let's just take a look. Okay, the first thing, I'll partition them so that each subgroup has a Condorcet winner or a core. Right? So that's the way we do it. And so the question is, can we do it? Mathematically, we're going to be able to do it because it's my experiment. But if I do it, does it work? That's a different matter. Okay, so here's a case. We're going to see if we can get the group to choose B. It's almost the core of the whole group. Here it is, okay? You can see that now I have to divide it up into a committee. I'm going to put it against G. Okay, there's G, okay? Now, so the question is it going to be G or B? Okay. I think in this case I want G to win. Let's find out. Okay, now I'm going to put these guys on one committee. Notice that the blue guys are going to, this is the group they're considering. The core is going to be here. Okay, you can look at it, that's where it's going to be. The yellow group is going to get this thing, and that's this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and B is going to be the core of the yellow group. How did I do that? Well, I actually chose which subset they were going to choose over, and I assigned the people to the committee. So that, as a matter of fact, going backward, blue is going to choose this, and yellow is going to choose that. So when it goes forward, it's a contest between G and B. When it's a contest between G and B, I know B is going to win. Right? That's the group as a whole. Oh, if you want to see what the subcommittee's ordering is, Subcommittee 1 likes B first, then D, F, I, K, N, N. Subcommittee 2 likes G, A, C, L. And these come from the preferences I've induced. I know what they are. Yeah?
So when it goes back to committee as a whole, is it G wins or B wins?
No, B wins.
What's that?
Or when you bring G and B back to the whole group?
When you bring back to the whole committee, that's the committee as a whole.
Right, and then B's going to win.
Yeah. So, and obviously I've done that, so I've challenged the decision maker. I'm trying to convince you, yeah, it's not the, quote, group preference that's driving this. The group preferences might be something quite different from what I want, right? What's that? The group preference, majority rule preference.
Yeah, I don't see how you would get G to win in the end.
What's that?
I don't see how you would manipulate it.
G? Well, because B dominates G by a majority of the whole.
Right. It's the other way around. I don't see how you would. I'll wait and listen.
Okay,
That's okay.
yeah, it does.
Charlie?
Yeah.
She's responding to a fact which you said earlier, that you're designing it with B and G, so G will win.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And that's what she's.
That's screwed up. It's B.
But it's B that's going to win.
Yeah. Yeah, allow me that. I'm not the good committee chairman. Okay? What about K? Can I get the group to choose this? K would be 1 and N. Okay? So K and N would be my choices. How would I do that? Now, between K and N, K is going to beat N when it goes up. Okay? So now the question is, could I get the group to choose K? Let's take a look at that. Okay, in this case, the blue committee is going to consider these. The yellow committee is going to consider these. If you check out who the blue committee prefers, that's going to be the core. If you check out which one the yellow committee prefers, that's going to be the core. So in the subcommittees, there's the core of one, the core of other. When they go up to the committee as a whole, N's down here, K's here, K's going to win. Notice what I've done, I've killed all these by the subcommittees. So I've made sure that the subcommittees got rid of all the things that I didn't want. So basically I'm using the subcommittees to get rid of extra stuff. Okay, here's just some voting. In this case, we're voting about K and L. So I did this 6 times like this. Out of the 6 trials, I got K 6 times. It never missed. Okay. Then the theory says I wanted H. I did it 6 times. 5 out of the 6 times I got H.
Why not 100% of the time?
These people. They're people. In fact, a lot of people ask that. They say, well, look, why don't you do this by computers? If computers acted like people, we wouldn't need to do the experiment. It turns out people do what people do, and that's the reason we need to look, because they can do weird, strange things from time to time. It's just that they're not that strange and not that weird.
Well, one might think that in a committee, an actual committee, not your committee, that the subcommittee would sit there thinking about what the other committee is doing. And
You have to keep them separate. You have to keep them separate. In fact, we can talk about how to separate them, but a good manager knows how to do that, right? You put them in different parts of the organization. You put them in different departments. You do, you get them so they're enemies. I don't know, but if you go through the CIA, for example, you see this amazing way that they have compartmentalized people and information. So compartmentalizing people and information is something organizations apparently know what to do and know how to do that, and for a reason, because it's really, really, really important. Okay? Oh, here's C. Could I get C? Well, let's see, I put it against D, of course, going up, C is going to beat D. So that's my committee arrangement. I did that 6 times, I got it 5, etc. Okay, now, yeah.
The way you have it set up, though, you could never get N, right?
I could not get in, that's right. Couldn't get them all. I tried to figure out how to do that, but to do that I'd have to get a cycle, and I didn't want to use cycles. Yeah.
I don't know if you ran this experiment, but how would this outcome change if you allowed members of the subcommittees to dissent?
To what?
In other words, if the rule were 3 out of 5, I'm assuming you require unanimity in the
No,
subcommittee.
these are all majority.
It's all simple
This is all majority, yeah, super
It's all
majority.
simple majority.
Majority, but with veto power, that's important.
What's that?
But with veto power.
Oh, I haven't got to the veto power. These are just super majority right now. This is just flat majority. So
Oh,
there's,
it's simple majority anyway.
it's simple
So it's not-
majority,
it
yeah.
doesn't affect
And you're using that all the time.
Yeah.
Because majority has this inherent conflict. And you're using that inherent conflict to get rid of options. So that's the way that these institutions work. Okay, so now right now I'm using a really, really, really rare kind of special construction of preferences. Now I'm going to go to a harder problem. I'm going to go to a harder problem so that the subcommittees do not have a core. If I look into the subcommittees, there's just cycles everywhere, right? But the fact that there's cycles everywhere, I'm going to be able to use. Because if there's a cycle everywhere and I have one guy that has veto power, that's the core, okay? It's really powerful. So, and we can look at that now, see how that works. For those of you, Now, how is the veto power going to work? Well, we're going to have a recognition rule, right? Then a motion. Is there a second? If there's no second, go back and somebody else. So if there is, then there's a vote. It's just that the second can come from the chairman only. In this particular rule, he has veto power because he proposed something and the chairman is just silent. He doesn't say anything. So the motion dies, right? So he can't vote on anything, he can't propose anything, but the fact that he doesn't second means it's out.
When you say you have cycles,
There are cycles.
everything occurs in a cycle or just one cycle?
I'm going to show you some dynamics. Oh no, there's cycles everywhere.
There's lots
Yeah,
of-
oh yeah, lots of cycles. Yeah. But it turns out the important thing, the dominance relation does not cycle. Okay? Under these types of rule. Okay, so dominance, we're going to say that X dominates Y if and only if both the majority and the chairman prefer X to Y. That's the definition of dominance. That gives me a binary relation. You could call it a preference if you want. We're going to call it a dominance relation. And the core is a set of undominated X. Okay, so let me show you how you do that. Here's the one I just showed you, right? And so, well, you can see the core, right? If there's cycles in here as there are here, and if this guy's a veto player, that's the only core. So the core is either going to be a line, a set of things, or it's going to be a point. And if it's a point, it's that guy. Okay, this maps back, all this I could map back into axiomatic social choice theory. We won't do that now. If you want to, I will. Okay, now let me show you in arithmetic how this works, because this is what's really neat. I'm going to be able to let a computer do this for me, right? Because it's going to turn out to be just matrix algebra, okay? Now what does this mean? I have a matrix here called majority rule, so I can put the X's and Y's, and the entry is going to be like this, if I had something to write with. I can have X, Y, Z, and X, Y, Z. So that is impossible, okay? If X beats Y, I'll put 1. If Z beats X, I'll put -1. I can actually create a matrix like this, which simply says it's a majority rule or not, okay? So that's going to be the majority rule matrix, M. I can do the same thing for the chairman. I can say here's X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z. If the chairman likes X over Y, it's a 1. If it likes Z over X, it's a -1. So the chairman has a matrix, okay? So I just have these two matrices. Very simple way of representing this complex set of preferences. It turns out that if I add those two matrices together, I'm going to get a dominance relation. It's a set of 0, 1s, I'm going to get a matrix. I'm going to call that a dominance relation, and my theory is going to be the core. Let's just see what that's going to look like. Oh boy, somebody doesn't like my, so there's the majority rule matrix. Here's the chairman, that's his matrix. I add the two together, hopefully. Okay. If that matrix, if that's 2, it means X dominates Y, 0, no. Okay? So this matrix right here actually gives me a matrix representation of the dominance of the core. I can compute the core. It's a place where there's zeros. So in this case, the core is 2 elements. So now notice that by choosing the preference of the chairman, that's this matrix, choosing who's on the committee, that's this matrix, I generate this matrix. The algebra itself tells me what the core is. Just flat mechanical. And it's so mechanical you'd think it won't work. Okay, so let's give a view. Here's a subset. This is the majority rule matrix, and that's H dominates this, K dominates this. If you follow these around, you're going to find out there's cycles everywhere. There's one right there. Right, so this matrix has lots of cycles in it. Okay, so there is no core in the committee. There's the chairman. Well, he has no cycles. He's transitive, and so that's his matrix of his binary relation. If I add the two together, I get this. That's the dominance relation of the committee. Now I have to find something that is not dominated. Okay. Notice that L here in case dominates everything. It's not dominated, so L is the core. So I can literally let the computer decide what the core is. This is not a... Okay, so now we can run that, and that's what the dominance relation will look like, by the way. That's the core. Okay, so in this committee, I said, okay, there's the core. That's my dominance relation. I ran this 6 times. I got it 4 out of the 6. It's not perfect. Now I've made another guy chairman. That gives me a different dominance relation. That's the core there. I ran this 6 times. I got it 5 times. K, that's my chairman. That turns out to be the core. I ran it 6 times, got it 4. The core wasn't unique. It was here and here, as it need not be unique. In this case, where you've got a veto player. I got either one or the other. I got this 2 times, that 3 times. That's 5 out of 6 times I got my core. Here's two elements of the core again. J and H. I got J 5 times, H, I got the pair 5 times. I never got H. Okay, now let's ask, did people vote sincerely? Now that's kind of an interesting question from a game theoretic point of view. When I look at those preferences, do those preferences, as I think they are, mirror their voting? And the answer is, well, more or less, most of the time, but not perfectly. We do have people out there voting strategically. They're in there. But they're not enough to undo the power of the committee, of the procedures. Okay, it works. I get 75% of a 75% hit rate, yeah.
How sophisticated is the chairman on this, on the veto, on the seconding of the vote?
How hot are they?
What is the chairman doing when he vetoes a proposal?
He just does not say I second. You make a proposal.
And what motivates
You
him
make.
on that? He can, no, I'm just trying to figure out exactly, is he thinking where that's going, or is he
I don't know what they're thinking. I
Sorry?
really and truly do not know what they're thinking.
Oh, really?
Oh, it's complex. This is really a complex thing. I mean, these guys are in a committee. They're yelling at each other. They're chatting. They're doing all kinds of things, and he's not supporting it, right? So.
I was thinking the same thing, but a different viewpoint, and that is, you could sit down and figure out what the chairman should do on each proposal that comes through.
We could do that.
And so the question I have is, did you analyze what happens if you
Does-
find out 6 cases where you didn't get it?
Did he? I don't. Yeah, we've looked at them, but I didn't see anything that motivated me. And frankly, there's just a ton of data here, and we haven't figured out how to go back and ask these delicate questions. Obviously, that kind of question is very important for institutional design from a manipulation point of view, right? So, well, this tells you a little bit. Choices not to, of course, stop short. Basically, they were moving along a dominance path and somehow they just stopped. Right? That's basically what was happening. Had he just kept going a little bit, it would have gotten there. But let's see, what do we got? 90%, 95% of the time we could predict what the guys were doing, how they were going to vote. When it didn't get it, it stopped short. Changes in the recognition rule. The problem was, frequently, see, the chairman can make no proposals. You tried to make proposals several times. You've raised your hands. It randomly did not choose you. After a while, you say, screw this. right? And so you just stop. And so we think it is the recognition rule was really the problem here and not strategic voting, Don, but we could find out. I mean,
Well,
that
I wasn't thinking strategic voting, I was thinking that the chairman might have made an error.
could have. They do screw up. They do screw up.
What's that?
Occasionally, not very much. They're pretty good at it. These guys are pretty good at it, yeah.
Yeah, what kind of subjects did you have? I mean, you were famous for getting just like ordinary people in Pasadena, or were these Caltech?
These were all Caltech students. Don't remember, are they all Caltech students? They might have been some Purdue students in here. There could have been. We're not that selective about where we recruit these people. There would have been no one off the street, and they would have been probably at Purdue where there's somebody who actually would be in the room with them. We wouldn't let them do them on the net because we have no control over who communicates with whom. They do have cell phones, so they have to be in a lab to do this kind of stuff. So, and it's a pain in the butt to bring people off the street. But by the way, let me address that. We've done that experiment there with people off the street. In fact, Linda probably did those, and they act about like Caltech students. I think Caltech students get through the instructions faster. That's about it.
What's that second line? I must have missed that.
I'm sorry.
All errors of the second point on there. All errors of the top grade chairman.
In a chairman, it was a 75% of the time we got exactly.
The next one down. The next one.
Oh, yeah. When they chose something other than what the chairman wanted, they were still really close to his most preferred option.
Oh, the top of the choice.
Yeah. So he has an ordering himself, and so every time he missed, they were kind of up in his. They weren't his most. We wanted him to get his most, right? Because that indicated. So when he stopped, he's always up in that area, but not right. That's it.
I have a feeling there'll be a lot of questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so first question, what did your subjects think about the rule? That is to say.
Oh, that's a good question. We asked them that. We asked them that. Yeah. I hated this question. My research assistant went out and asked this questionnaire. It really pissed me off because I don't like to interact with the subjects. But he went ahead, he had to. Anyway, here's the answer. So did it accurately reflect preferences? Well, in the Condorcet winner, when there was a Condorcet winner, they thought that all the time. When there's a chairman, no, they didn't think so much. Okay, they thought the chairman was screwing around. Did it depend upon partially on luck? Well, they thought it was kind of random, both kinds. Depend on skill. They're talking about their skill. Of course, their skill has nothing to do with this, but it's being generated by the rules. But about half of them think it depends upon skill. Was it fair? About half of them thought that the Condorcet case was they didn't think that the chairman was fair. And this is interesting. Did you vote strategically? Under when there's a majority rule winner? No, over half of them think that they voted strategically when there was a chairman there. But as a matter of fact, they might have, but it made no difference whatsoever. So in their mind, they're being strategic and wise. But from the point of view of the system behavior, no. Did they notice any cycles? Well, there were no cycles to notice. There were never a voting cycle here, but they could note but cycles, they mean some kind of inconsistency. But what they mean, I don't know. So anyway, that answers the question. I'm so glad he asked the question, but it sure did irritate me at the time. Yeah.
So this is really interesting, and I love to see where it's gone in the past 30 years. Because there was a little piece of this from a long time ago, but it makes me. I sort of see it's an illustration of something. I'm just wondering how much you're willing to really push it as what the experiment's supposed to apply to. Because I would say that in an important committee, the just taking the second bunch with the chair, the identity of the chairman is not a random selection. In fact,
Shows by the group.
There's something very important about the way the chair was
Right.
chosen. And I'd like to point out that you've never been a department chair.
No, but I sure watched them.
No, it's just that this is an endogenous choice. And it's
By the way,
just
I
that
did
the
talk
chair
about-
would be selected.
I did talk
So
about
that
to
they
Betsy
would-
Hoffman about this, and she fell right into it. Anyway, I don't know. I think that let me answer your question directly. To me, this is a scientific project. I just want to know what principles are operating, right? Whether they operate in a much more complex environment or not, I'm curious about that. But I can see just from the questions you ask, I can see that there's lots of principles operating in these in actual committees that I don't know anything about. In fact, we heard them, right? And so I'm really curious about how do I make those things precise, and how do we put them here so I can actually test them.
Because you would think that in a committee that's important, people know sort of what's going on, and it's been around a long time, and they know there's heterogeneity, that they would try very hard to select a chair that would behave in a particular way.
Oh, I think that's great. And so the question is, but when there's cycles, my guess is, just from watching chairman, is that the chairman makes sure that everybody thinks he's on their side. The chairman is always going to be chosen unanimity because the chairman is really good at making people think that he wants what they want individually and never getting caught at it. I don't know, Linda, you know more about that than I would. Anyway, that would be my conjecture, is that that kind of, whether it could fall back on a rule, right? People say, well, we don't know what's going to do. Well, it's fair if and they make some pronouncement about a rule, and people say, yeah, I'll buy into that. I don't know. But I think that I'm exposing it to you guys because I'm really quite interested in that question. You know, I just need to make it a little more precise. I have tools to look at things. I just don't know what questions to ask. Yeah, go ahead.
So you might think, though, that when you're choosing even committees and when you're choosing members of committees, that in some respects you don't have quite the degrees of freedom that you're suggesting. That is to say that you can't just partition the alternatives up arbitrarily, right? And you can't partition the members. You're going to say, you go out and check look at the candidates who are,
lawyers,
doing some discipline.
Yeah,
So
right.
you're choosing a hire.
Or,
You go out and do the micro candidate or whatever the
Yeah.
And then on that committee, you would feel some obligation to put members that match the committee agenda, right? Your story really requires you to not be subject to the discipline of those categories.
or I know how to use the language.
Yeah,
I really know how to use the language. After all, I could choose gender, I could choose discipline, I could use height, I could use age, I could use background. There are so many dimensions that I could use. Some of them sell. But I think that's the right word. In my intuition, that's the right word. I know what I want to do. I know where I want to put them. How am I going to sell it? And that's where the principles come in. So,
Well, if I can jump in on there, Bruce. If you've ever been chair of a committee and you're choosing subcommittees, you don't need to know this result, but you have a pretty good idea. I mean, I'm a chair of a committee and I'm choosing subcommittees and I'm choosing what you're looking at. And I have a pretty good idea what's going to be the result too.
And you think that you can just, without anybody thinking at odd, populate these committees with people who have no expertise on what they're attending?
No, I'm making sure they have the expertise.
Well, the expertise is the vote you want.
No, that's why I selected to be on the committee originally.
Right.
well, I'm glad I stimulated some conversation here. Yeah, go ahead.
I've spent all my life in corporations and boards, and I would say to you that half the time people aren't paying attention. You're sitting in a room where everybody's focused on who should do what and what can happen. most people are too busy doing other things to pay any attention to that.
To this kind of manipulation.
And so you've got a chairman who knows how to manipulate or not, but invariably you have a kingmaker who's invisible. Power is inversely proportional to visibility. So if you've got some quiet guy in the back, he advises and becomes the best friend of the chairman who wants this work to go away. He says, well, you know, Joe and so-and-so, they work, and you know, they work together. It's amazing. But we all think everybody's uniform and everybody's rational and everybody's the same rank. They're not. And I think that's the one thing that leaves all this open to this kind of gaming. And as somebody who had to pay for his own airplane, I wish I'd known you back in the day. The notion that you can manipulate, I think, is far more unseen than people give it credit for. And even though we're scientists in this room, when you take us out of the science realm and put us into a different realm, we can be manipulated too. It's what you know and what you're used to. So watch for the invisible guy.
Well, I see the Caltech faculty are all experts in this. A good chairman just can maneuver them around like crazy. And
we bow to power.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's sort of an offbeat question, but it leads to a point. If this slide you had, where you had all the people around all the different locations, and then you were going to create the subcommittees. Imagine a slightly different version of that experiment. Are you able to figure out, with some reasonable degree of probability, let's say you're the chair, you don't know who the subcommittee members are, but you're asking yourself this question: if the full committee is going to resolve this, I know what the core is. If a subcommittee of 5 out of the 9 or whatever it is going to resolve this, what's the probability I get a better result from my perspective than the core, with random draw on the members? Is that something you can figure out?
Well, in a way we know that, right?
So do you
because if you draw these guys at random,
right,
almost surely there's going to be cycles. If there's cycles, and I appoint my guy as chairman,
right,
that's the core. So the only thing I really need to know is, or guess on, there's conflict.
So
that's my friend.
Yeah.
Conflict is my friend, and that's my guy.
So here,
and that's enough.
Here are two contexts where I'm just sort of thinking out loud about the possibility of applications, and I'm not sure if I'm right on either one of them. One is in the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, which happens to be here. There's a practice called mini en banc review, which is unlike all the other circuits in the United States. So the way it works is the circuit hears cases in randomly assigned panels of 3. In every circuit in the United States, except for the 9th, because it's so large, there's a possibility in the event of a conflict within the circuit or some compelling additional justification or alternative justification, to hear the case en banc. Except in all the other circuits, it's the full court. Except in the Ninth Circuit, it's mini en banc because there are so many judges, I think there's 25, that they assign it to a committee of 11 to hear the case again. So you've got a decision by a panel. You have the possibility of a full court review for which you would know the core, but you're making the decision whether to assign it to an alternative mini en banc of 11. You don't know who they're going to be, but you know it's going to be 11, not 25.
But you know the chief is always on the panel.
But you know the chief can get to assign the opinion.
And
right?
he's always on the
and
panel.
is always on the panel.
That's convenient.
Yeah.
Exactly. That could be a kind of
an application. Possible.
I don't know what you think.
Yeah, it's the closest thing
Possibly.
that I can think of.
Yeah. Well, you know, you could look at the decisions and find out.
Yeah.
Right. Because if he's the core and if he's getting his way,
He dissents a lot, actually. He's a colorful guy. Because there are the preferences are
It's a
very
really
wide.
weird,
Yeah.
it's a wacko, it's really a strange process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does this depend on the committee members being different? That is, suppose you've got the same committee, first dealing with the first half of the total set, then secondly they deal with the second half of the set. Having made the choice, they then deal
We
with
actually did some like that. We did a couple like that, not very many, but where we actually had, you sat as a committee in this half, you deliberated, made a choice, And then a little later, you sat as the same committee on the second half, right? But it was a little different. It wasn't pure. It wasn't the pure sequential structure that we get out. We know that if we deal with these sequential committees like this, that the sequential nature doesn't affect it that much. You still kind of go to the instantaneous core. They're not very good at linking these things over time. So the time path of the core is not so good as the instantaneous model of the core. But again, guys, you're taking us into areas that, you know, there's a few experiments going on. You need to write National Science Foundation and tell them to get more money in this.
Ryan? Charlie, on the whiteboard over there, you have two graphs. The one on the left is no veto player. The one on the right is the veto player. And the circled person is the core. And you saw that in experiments, they went to the core in both cases. But and you said it was because of characteristics of the core, and maybe there's something about the core that's making them go there. But if we would run the experiment on the left and barely move the core person, so he's no longer a core, of course we'd expect, probably, humans would end up picking at that point. That's not the core. They're attracted to it because of something else. Maybe it's a middle.
No, I don't quite understand what you're saying.
So on the left graph there.
Let's start from scratch.
Okay. Core person, no veto player. Yeah.
Now what?
Move the core person just epsilon down, so he's not the core anymore.
Right.
Wouldn't we still expect people to be attracted to that?
Oh, I can tell you roughly what will happen. First is, there's cycles everywhere. Okay, in fact, this is one of the first things we did. So let's look at this thing here. This set right here, Fairjohn and other people call it the yoke. It turns out the data will tend to kind of go around that set of points. And subsequent things have it skewed out in here quite a bit. But once you don't have the core, and it's pure majority rule, I think that's very controversial, where there's a principle which will really tell us what's happening. The first thing, it will not just follow this guy.
Sure.
It's going to explode back up.
Charlie, can you get Pareto inefficiency?
What's that?
Could you get Pareto?
Yeah, you can do, not really, because everything in here is Pareto. Now, to get Pareto inefficiency, you're going to have to change these preferences so that the Pareto set does something like this. Okay? If you do that, you can have these kind of cycles swilling out in here every once in a while. But it's very seldom you get any kind of Pareto inefficiency out of these things. So Pareto tend to be in the Pareto set. It's not a bad model, but it's so big, it's everything. Yeah.
In one of your experiments that I saw about, experimental results that I saw about 4 or 5 years ago, you used your Plott diagram and you moved this core person up a little bit, and surprisingly fast it moved into that point.
You mean down to here?
Yeah. Well, you weren't that
No,
far
it will
off.
typically go out here. Now, if no, I'd have to see what data, but I think that it's going to explode a little.
Well, you weren't going to where the person moved in, where I thought it was not
Here?
going to. Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think so. You could dig out if it's my work, we could find it, but I don't think that's true.
Any other comments, questions?
Just again, a question about the chairman. I'm just trying to figure out, I know you don't have the results exactly about how he behaved, but is this sort of thought that he's just not seconding proposals that are far from his ideal point? Is that really all we're thinking about what he's doing? That's right. That's really what that's too far.
Well, unless it's kind of moving towards his ideal point, he's not going to let it. It will tend to follow the dominance relation that leads into his preference. So these dominance relations are kind of wandering around, but there is a path that leads into him. So it will follow those paths, and that's really a pretty good.
So you propose something really far away, you won't second it. Then you propose.
Oh, he can start there.
He could start.
But unless it's in his interest, it's gone to the current.
Yeah.
the current moves.
And so you only second something that moves closer on the next move. So.
Now, let me tell you one. Let me close with one. I guess you go about it. There's a whole area that we haven't talked about where there's asymmetric information. So, like in the jury, some people know some things, some people know other things. You'd like to design a system where it aggregates that information. That's a whole additional body of stuff that people are interested in. So my guess is that as we move into the law, the ability of these procedures to actually collect and aggregate information, so you quote find, is the guy really guilty according to the facts, if everybody knows the facts, type of stuff, I think that that's very alive. And and as you think about practical problems, my guess is you'll probably run into something like that. Just, that's not what we're discussing here. Okay, these guys know what they want. Yeah.
So some psychological kind of problems, if you have a mathematically a similar problem or mathematically a same problem, but expressed differently. So all your problems,
like framing, framing type.
Yeah, all your problems are expressed already in geometry, and which suggests that might be a key role. Do you have examples of this, which is?
Well, I can. If they don't understand the relationship between choices and if they don't understand the relationship between the choice and their incentives, as can be if it's an isomorphism, because they can't solve the problem, you're not going to get this. In fact, you can systematically show that framing, for example, much of framing is due to that. People actually do not know that they've been mistaken about the relationship between the act that they're taking, the choice they make, and what their rewards are.
The preferences that you give them have a geometric flavor.
Oh, that's a good question. Let's suppose that we embedded this. Here's a good question. Let's suppose we embedded this in letters of the alphabet, or just objects, whatever. So there's no underlying topology. So the concept of direction can't be discussed. Of course, that's the reason you need principles, it's dimensions, so that we could talk about direction. So if we have something where there's absolutely no underlying topological space, so neighborhoods and direction have no meaning, then the core is going to be very difficult to find.
Yeah, well, not no topological meaning, but no
measure theoretic meaning, maybe.
No geometrical meaning.
No, well, I think it actually needs.
No Euclidean, you can't put it.
Oh, these are all Euclidean, but I mean nothing. I mean you don't need the Euclidean metrics here to do this. Just any kind of direction is going to do it.
Because the core is just ordinal.
What's that?
The core is just ordinal, right?
Oh yeah, it didn't care what the topology is. Yeah.
Can I run a sample against you to see what?
Can I refer somebody else to answer it in case it's too hard?
For example, the Medicare Drug Act that was enacted last administration. It was sort of amendments from both sides, and it sort of went through the moving around of this end solution. But they came up with a compromise, sort of, solution. And I think comparing the Affordable Care Act, I think it was at a one-point solution, that it wasn't that give and take of moving around the different solutions.
Well, you're getting into worlds.
I mean,
you're getting into a world that's much above my pay scale. Okay. But the I can comment on the models. I can comment on the models. Most of these models are driven by a type of veto structure. A veto need not be a person. It could be a committee. So you could have one committee suppose you have a bunch of people, I don't care where they are, I'll just do the same thing. Suppose you have this committee, if they act under unanimity, can veto, right? And we have another committee that if it acts under veto. Well, it turns out that's going to be the only point in the core. Let's suppose that the core is not there. It turns out if these sets intersect, the veto, the Pareto optimals of the veto and committee, if they intersect, that intersection is the core. All right. So if you deal with these really odd or different kinds of geometric rules, the geometry and the underlying theory will let you tell what it's supposed to see. So the only way I would know that would be kind of embedded into something I could understand, try to figure out who the veto players were. Now you remember that all of this about the veto player came out of studies of the closed rule. We were literally looking at the closed rule when we first started doing this kind of research a long time ago.
Well, but
So again,
so the example with the veto player would be the president vetoing the bill.
president, or it could be the House,
Or House. Okay,
or
but-
majority of the horse, or it could be a committee that gets the two together.
Right.
I don't know. You know, I don't know who all. I just see these complex political structures as, you know, structures of veto players and tiers of them, and
But,
so
I guess the example of the Medicare prescription drug bill, where there were lots of amendments and changes that moved the solution around, there was some sort of compromise that they arrived at.
Well,
I didn't follow
that's-
that very much at the time, but it seemed that the process worked for that long.
that sound, you know, the story you're telling is consistent with following a dominance relation. So, yeah.
We've talked about the asymmetric information and applications to the law. I think you're right that juries present a good example of asymmetric information, but decision-making by bodies of judges, appellate judges, some of Max's work, I think
It's more this.
It's much closer to this. And the Supreme Court is the closest because there are repeat players. You have a very good, it's very easy to predict where they're going to come out in many kinds of cases. And it's a two-step voting process. First, do you take the case? And second, how do you vote if you take the case? And so there's
What
a
do you
lot of
think you can
strategic
map the
behavior.
Supreme Court decision-making process onto this?
Well, I think about the decision to grant cert. You know, so it's a two-stage process, but it's not like this in the sense that the Chief Justice can't dictate who's deciding that question, but in terms of they're acting with full information.
The one exception that I was thinking about the other comments, Berger, when Berger was Chief Justice, his colleagues hated him for this. What he would do is, not all the time, but if he would have been in dissent, but he knew that he was losing. I mean, he knew his natural inclination would put him in dissent. He would actually vote against that position so that he could be in the majority and assign the opinion. So and because he's Chief Justice, so the Chief Justice, when in the majority, gets to assign the opinion. And if the Chief Justice is in dissent, the senior most justice assigns the opinion. So Berger would join majorities to
just have that power,
which would give him that kind of.
And he could write the opinion himself.
He can assign it to himself.
That's convenient.
It's a good job.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt about that, right? But that might have some.
Yeah. I see that.
Yeah.
Well, my feeling about that is that's the reason I'm here, because these things are so complex. I'm not going to be able to do it.
Remember the other thing?
I'm out here in the abstract world.
The other thing you might want to know, Saul Leavenworth wrote a paper years ago called "When Two Decisions Are Better Than One." It was about juries and different. It was about bicameralism actually, but he had a footnote about juries that I always play with when in my public choice class. I ask my students to think about. His question that he posed was: you're a criminal defendant. Would you rather have a jury of 12 or 2 juries of 6? And thinking that it's sort of similar to some of this stuff. I don't know if anyone's done any natural experiments on that. You know, and he goes through different experiments sort of verbally about why you might prefer one or the other, but it's worth thinking about that. I mean, it'd be kind of fun to play with that and think, you know, which, I'm not sure what the answer is. My students tend to come up with pretty clever arguments on both sides.
Let me tell you, I think that in terms of doing this research, having access to those kinds of examples is great, because when we get into this world of institutions, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's just an unconstrained mess. It's just lots of language, and I can't make heads or tails out of the rules. There's a rules on top of rules. Every deliberative body has its own rules. Wow.
Well, some
there's
of us-
there's no guidance.
Just to make
through
you feel
the-
better, some of
through
us
the-
on this side of the aisle find some of the math a little bit tricky.
Well, maybe, but that's exactly what I had. If you recall, when we had our initial discussion, that's exactly one of the things which I hope to come out of this particular workshop, is where those of us in social choice can find institutional or other type issues that we hadn't thought about that we could look at. And several of them came up today, and also the other way around on there. I think what we're going to do at this stage is we're going to call it a day. And I want to thank Charlie. Thank you.